I wasn't supposed to be home that early. The doctor had canceled my appointment last minute, so I pulled into my driveway humming to myself, thinking I'd surprise Brandon and Kelsey with their favorite blueberry muffins. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a Thursday afternoon, until I noticed the guest room door pulled almost shut. A sliver of light sliced through the hallway. Then I heard them. "Once she's in the assisted living home, we can finally sell the house," Kelsey whispered, her voice sharp and impatient. My hand froze on the muffin box. I leaned in, just enough to hear, praying I misunderstood. Brandon sighed heavily. "It won't take long. Her memory lapses will convince the doctor. The faster she declines, the better for us. The faster she declines." The words didn't feel real. They dropped like stones in my stomach, cold and heavy. I pressed my back against the wall, breath trembling. My own son, my only son, speaking about me like I was nothing more than a burden with a price tag attached. I wanted to walk in and demand answers. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stayed silent, listening as they discussed timelines, appointments, paperwork I thought they'd handled out of love. My legs felt weak. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Every maternal instinct inside me shattered at once, replaced by a numbness I'd never felt before. Finally, I stepped away, still unseen. I placed the muffins quietly on the counter, hands shaking, their voices faded into muffled echoes. In that moment, standing alone in my own hallway, I realized something that cut deeper than any betrayal. The people I trusted most were planning to destroy the life I'd built, and they thought I'd never see it coming. I don't remember driving to the grocery store parking lot. I only remember sitting there, gripping the steering wheel long after the engine stopped, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. My mind kept replaying their voices like a broken recording. Brandon's sigh, Kelsey's sharp whisper. The cold, calculated words meant for no one's ears but their own. The faster she declines. It looped endlessly, slicing deeper each time. I thought of every moment I'd trusted them. Every time I'd let Brandon fill out my insurance documents, every evening Kelsey insisted on organizing my medications, so I wouldn't get confused. I had believed them. I had let myself believe they were helping because they loved me. Now it all felt staged. Weaponized. When I finally walked back into the house hours later, they were waiting in the kitchen, smiling like nothing had happened. "Mom, we were wondering where you went," Brandon said, acting concerned, his eyes searching my face. I forced a polite smile, one that felt stiff and foreign. "Just ran some errands." That was the moment I realized I had to pretend I hadn't heard a thing, pretend I wasn't terrified, pretend I wasn't drowning in betrayal. Rage would have given me away. Tears would have exposed everything. So I smiled. I nodded. I even let Kelsey place a hand on my shoulder, though it burned like poison. Inside, the heartbreak was suffocating. Like watching my life collapse from behind a glass wall where no one could hear me scream. But beneath the pain, something unexpected began to take shape. A plan. Quiet. Careful. Sharp. If they were going to treat me like I was helpless, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. By the next morning, the numbness had hardened into something colder. Clarity. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. Betrayal has a cruel way of keeping a person awake and painfully alert. At dawn, I showered, dressed neatly, and walked out the door without saying a word to Brandon or Kelsey. They were still asleep, wrapped in the comfort of a home they believed would soon be theirs. They had no idea I was about to rewrite their future. I drove straight to Mitchell and Hartman Attorneys, a small brick building I'd trusted for years. When I stepped inside, the receptionist blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Lawson? I don't think you had an appointment today." "I need to see Mr. Hartman," I said softly. Urgently. Within minutes, I was seated across from Harold Hartman, a man who had handled my estate planning since Brandon was in middle school. His kind eyes narrowed as he noticed the tension in my shoulders. "Maggie, what's wrong?" I swallowed, choosing my words carefully. I'd like to make changes to my will. He paused. Significant changes? Very significant. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I told him enough. Enough for him to understand that the people listed as beneficiaries no longer had my trust. Enough for him to stop taking notes and start paying attention. When I said the name Danielle Parker, his pen froze mid-air. My daughter from my first marriage, the child I hadn't spoken to in years. The last person anyone, especially Brandon, would expect. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. I looked him straight in the eyes, as sure as a mother can be when her own son plots against her. By the time I left the office, my will and my resolve had changed forever. When I returned home that afternoon, something in the air felt rehearsed. Brandon and Kelsey were in the kitchen, moving around with an energy that felt choreographed, almost eager. Brandon looked up first, flashing a smile that was just a little too bright. "Mom, we made lunch. Thought you might be hungry." Hungry? He hadn't cooked for me since he was 17 and trying to impress a girl with burnt grilled cheese. Kelsey chimed in, her voice honey-sweet. "We were thinking about taking a family trip soon, somewhere relaxing, maybe Florida. You'd love the warm weather." I stood there, purse still on my shoulder, watching them perform kindness like it was a school play they'd barely rehearsed. Their movements were stiff, their eyes constantly glancing at each other, as if checking cues. Every offer felt like a trap wrapped in politeness. Brandon pulled out a chair for me. Sit. We made chicken soup. Your favorite." It wasn't my favorite. They knew that. But I sat anyway, keeping my expression soft, my voice calm. The new will was safely filed at the attorney's office. For now, I needed to stay quiet. Invisible. Predictable. If they thought I was unaware, they'd keep revealing themselves. Kelsey placed a steaming bowl in front of me. "You need your strength," she said gently, but her eyes lingered on me a second too long, evaluating, calculating. I thanked them, lifting the spoon with steady hands. Inside, my heart beat like a warning drum. Their sudden affection wasn't love, it was pressure, strategy, manipulation. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, this performance was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the house turned into a stage, and Brandon and Kelsey were determined to play the parts of devoted caretakers. But devotion doesn't come naturally to the deceitful. Their smiles were stiff, their sudden kindness was too polished. And the way they whispered the moment I left a room, that was the real giveaway. They thought they were hiding their scheme. They didn't realize I was already steps ahead. Late one evening, after they'd gone upstairs, I walked into the kitchen under the dim glow of the oven light. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady, as I reached into my purse and pulled out a small recording device. A simple, cheap gadget. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. I placed it behind the bread box, angled toward the center of the room. They always whispered in the kitchen. People planning something sinister tend to gather where they feel safest. As I stepped back, a tremor of guilt hit me. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I hated what had forced me into this role. A mother spying on her own child. A woman turning her home into an evidence trap. I never imagined I'd need protection from the people I raised. The next morning, I pretended to shuffle around the house with the absent-mindedness they expected. Where did I put my glasses? Did I take my afternoon pill? I let them believe the narrative they were building. Meanwhile, the recorder lay hidden, silent, patient, waiting. Hours later, as I watched them talk in hushed tones over coffee, something in their posture, their urgency, told me I had done the right thing. I didn't know what the recorder would catch, but I knew one thing for certain: the truth was about to reveal itself. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the small recorder pressed between my palms, heart pounding. My hands shook, not from fear, but from anticipation. I pressed play, and their voices filled the room, crisp and intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. "If she refuses the medication again, we can just tell the doctor she's non-compliant," Brandon said, voice low but sharp. "No one will question it." Kelsey chuckled softly. She's already forgetful. If we exaggerate the episodes, the doctor will have no choice. Assisted living will look like the only option. I leaned forward, the chill creeping down my spine. My own son, plotting my downfall as if my life were a chessboard piece. They discussed schedules, appointments, and subtle ways to make me appear unstable, arranging accidental falls, leaving notes I'd supposedly misplaced, even talking about tampering with my medications. The cold precision in their planning made my blood run ice cold. Every whispered detail painted a picture more horrifying than I could have imagined. I could feel their greed and cruelty saturating the room through the tiny device. They weren't just careless, they were meticulous, calculating, and every word confirmed that the family I had built, the love I had poured into them, had been weaponized against me. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to cry, scream, to rush into the kitchen and confront them. But I knew better. Patience was my ally now. Every word I recorded, every detail I collected, would become my power. By the time the recording ended, I wasn't just shocked. I was resolute. I would make them regret thinking I was helpless. Every plot they hatched would be turned against them, and I would do it without them ever seeing it coming. For days, I replayed the recordings, each time focusing on the subtle cues, the way Kelsey's voice softened, the way Brandon's instructions were precise, almost commanding. At first, I had assumed Kelsey was the driving force, the one manipulating my son into betrayal, but as I listened closer, a horrifying truth emerged. Brandon was the architect. Every suggestion, every step, every strategy had originated from him. Kelsey wasn't the villain. She was following his lead, agreeing out of fear or convenience. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. My own son, the boy I had held in my arms as an infant, the man I had supported through college and heartbreaks, had meticulously planned to undermine my life. And there were layers I hadn't anticipated. Debt, hidden credit cards maxed out, gambling, an addiction he had buried so deeply that not even Kelsey seemed to fully understand it. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. A desperate attempt to cover his sins at my expense. I sat there, trembling, but not from fear, from a surge of clarity. Anger coiled through me like fire, fueling a cold, precise resolve. I had underestimated him, but now I saw everything clearly. This wasn't just a plan against me. It was a reflection of who he really was, and the sooner I acted, the sooner I could stop him. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. I would confront this with intelligence, patience, and a strategy they could never anticipate. Brandon's secrets, his schemes, his desperation, they were all about to become his undoing. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of satisfaction amidst the heartbreak. The mother who had been betrayed was no longer powerless. I waited until evening, when the soft orange glow of the setting sun cast long shadows across the living room. Brandon and Kelsey were laughing over a board game, pretending normalcy. I stepped in quietly, holding the small recorder in my hand, its weight heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. "Mom, are you okay?" Kelsey asked, her tone sweet, almost too sweet. I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed play, and their voices filled the room again, this time unmistakably real, undeniable. Brandon froze mid-laugh, and Kelsey's eyes widened in horror as recognition dawned. I can explain," Brandon stammered, stepping forward, but I held up a hand. "This isn't about explanations," I said, my voice cold but steady. "It's about the truth. Every word, every plan, every lie, it's all here." They both sank into the couch, faces pale. Kelsey's lips trembled, but Brandon's jaw tightened as he realized the depth of my knowledge. Years of deceit, manipulation, and hidden greed had been recorded in one silent device. You were going to make me appear incompetent," I continued, feeling a fierce clarity I hadn't known I could summon. "You were planning to steal my life. And you thought I wouldn't find out." Brandon's face contorted with a mixture of panic and anger. Kelsey began to cry, the pretense of kindness shattered into shards. For the first time, the house wasn't theirs. The power had shifted. I didn't shout, I didn't beg, I simply stood there, letting the weight of their betrayal settle around them. The police and lawyers would be involved soon, but in this moment, I savored the quiet reckoning, the first step in reclaiming everything they had tried to take. For once, I was no longer the victim. I was the storm. The courthouse smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and tension. Brandon's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a rigid mask of fury and desperation. He tried to paint me as forgetful, unstable, a mother slipping quietly into decline. But I had come prepared. Every recording, every detail I had captured, every pattern of manipulation was laid out like evidence in a cruel puzzle only I could solve. Danielle's arrival was the first shock to him. My daughter from a life Brandon barely acknowledged, stepping into the courtroom with quiet determination. She had every right to be angry, to be skeptical, but she carried herself with the calm strength I had always hoped to instill in her. Her presence was a mirror, reflecting the justice I was about to claim. The lawyer presented the recordings. Brandon's schemes were undeniable. Kelsey's testimony, shaky and hesitant, only confirmed the depth of their planning. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she listened, absorbing each calculated move Brandon had tried to hide. I remained calm, my hands folded in my lap, watching the truth unfold like a story written in stone. My heartbreak, my betrayal, my sleepless nights, all of it had led to this moment. Brandon's attempts to twist the narrative crumbled under the weight of evidence. Every objection, every desperate plea only reinforced the meticulous preparation I had taken to protect myself. When the ruling finally came, the room held its breath. The court acknowledged the validity of the revised will, my mental competence, and Brandon's manipulations. The battle was over, not just in law, but in principle. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, unwavering relief. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been earned, and Brandon, confronted by the consequences of his own greed, could only watch. The day I revealed the final will, I felt an unusual calm, almost eerie in its precision. Brandon and Kelsey sat across from me, the courtroom murmurs fading into a hollow background. They had watched their plans crumble, their schemes exposed, yet they still clung to hope. A hope that I would relent, that I might forgive, that I might leave something for them. I let the silence stretch, letting every second of anticipation settle in their chests. Then, I spoke, my voice clear and deliberate. Brandon, Kelsey, you thought you could manipulate me, accelerate my decline, and claim what wasn't yours. You underestimated one thing, a mother's vigilance and her ability to protect her life and her legacy. Brandon's eyes flickered with panic. Kelsey's lips quivered. I leaned forward and laid the document on the table. The will has been rewritten. Danielle Parker, my daughter from my first marriage, is now the primary heir. And there's one final clause you should know. If either of you contests this will or attempts to interfere in my care or decisions again, you will receive nothing, not even sentimental items. The shock froze them. Brandon's greed faltered into disbelief. Kelsey's tears betrayed her guilt. The courtroom was silent except for the judge's pen scratching across documents. Danielle stepped forward, her presence a quiet force, a reminder of the life I had protected, the future I had secured. I leaned back, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Control had returned. The betrayal was met with poetic justice, and the people who thought they could exploit me were powerless. In the end, I realized, vigilance, patience, and a calculated plan can turn heartbreak into triumph, and teach even the closest betrayers the true cost of greed.